morning, everyone. Good afternoon, in fact. Nice to see you, unfortunately, by Zoom, not in person, but very happy to be chairing this session this afternoon with Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. Thank you very much, Dr. Soumya, as we say here in Geneva, to join us for this very, very important youth and as you see here, Expert Summit we have at Sciences Po. It happens every week and every year, sorry, and it's a very important moment to create the link between people who are leading international affairs and the students who are studying and preparing themselves to be leading in the future. So we will have 45 minutes. We would like Dr. Soumya to start maybe the first 20 minutes. I'll be asking you 4 questions about your background, about the role of the chief science in WHO. And of course, we're going to talk also about COVID and what have been the main lessons learned you would like to share with the students. So that's going to take about, let's say, the first 20, 25 minutes of this session. And then we're going to take 20 minutes to have a Q&A session with the students, because it's for us very important to give the floor to them. So first of all, thank you very, very much again, Dr. Soumya, to be with us this afternoon. And as I said, I would like maybe if you can start presenting a little bit your background, because you are a pediatrician coming from India. You have been working in several countries, in the US, in India, of course, and now in Geneva. And I think it's good for the students to see a little bit what is the background of someone like you and why you are leading today this department. Thank you, Dr. Soumya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pizarro. And good afternoon, colleagues, students. Maybe some of you are in different time zones, so also good morning and good evening. I know we have a hybrid event here. So, Louise, as you said, I'm from India. I'm a pediatrician. I was interested in research from very early on, even when I was a child, actually. I wanted to do research even before I wanted to know that I will be a doctor. So it was in a way accidental that I went into medicine. I was definitely interested in science and research, particularly around genetic diseases. And however, after I finished my undergraduate training in medical, I got interested in pediatrics. So I did my postgraduate degree, my MD in pediatrics, also in India at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Then a couple of years training in the US on pediatric lung diseases. And then a couple of years in the UK, actually more on the research side, working on, at that time was a very common, not a very common, but a common problem of sudden infant death, where newborns just died, were found dead by the parents and without an unknown cause. So it was really an exploration of how breathing is controlled in the brain. And we did some sophisticated experiments with twin babies, identical as well as non-identical twins, to see how much is genetic. So it was very fascinating, actually, the research exposure that I had during my fellowship in the US and in the UK, but then I was always committed to going back to India and working there. And when I went back, the opportunity I got was to work at the Tuberculosis Research Center, which is a center focused on TB. And I used my skills essentially to try to understand both the immunology of tuberculosis in young children and how different people behave when they get TB infection. It's still one of the enigmas, actually. We don't understand why 100 people are exposed to TB and 5 pick up the infection, but only a few of them will progress to disease. The rest, their body's immune system is able to contain it. And because we don't understand that, it's one of the reasons we don't have a good vaccine for TB. The same applies to malaria and HIV, where the immune reaction is very complex. Whereas when you look at SARS-CoV-2 virus, the COVID pandemic, yes, we've been lucky, but also because this is a virus that has a target for a vaccine, and scientists were able to discover that early on and prepare not one, but many, many different types of vaccines, and all, most of them are proven to be very effective and very safe. So TB is still a disease where there's need for a lot of basic research. So I spent about 25 years at this institute in Chennai, which is in South India. And then I became the head of the Indian Council of Medical Research, which is a body which is similar to maybe say INSERM in France or the NIH in the US. So I was the Director General. I was overseeing all of medical research in India. And then when Dr. Tedros won the election last 5 years ago and became the Director General, he actually invited me to join him in his senior leadership team. So I joined as a Deputy Director General, working as his deputy and overseeing all the programmatic areas. But then soon there was an opportunity because we had a transformation within WHO. We sort of created new divisions, and one of them was the science division. And I then became the first chief scientist of WHO. So for the last almost 3 years now. That's
in March 2019, right? You took this position. Yes, I see one of our colleagues saying that maybe if you can just talk a little bit closer to the microphone, or if there is a microphone just around you, that would improve, let's say, the sound, because there is a little bit of echo. I don't know if that's possible in the office. So I think it's good for the students to understand why WHO decided to create this position first of Chief of Science, this department. And also, I think that during the COVID, we have seen how important it is to bring science to the core of the discussion, and for policymakers, future policymakers we have here in the room, understanding how you dialogue between science and the political, the policymakers, that would be great. So what has been your vision and your aim in this department those last 3 years?
It's a very important, interesting question, Louise. So the reason that WHO decided to create it, even though WHO, right from the day it was formulated in 1948, was a science-based organization. It's a normative organization. It makes policy, it makes recommendations, it makes guidelines. And these are all evidence-based and data-based. It was implicit, but we decided that it needs to be very explicit, because firstly, living today in the 21st century, a lot of the future of health and medicine is going to be driven by innovations in technology and in science, in different disciplines actually, which could impact health. So it's important for there to be a body, a group that's looking at those changes, those innovations, those advances, and seeing where we can leverage them for health. And also thinking a little bit about the risks, because as you know, each new technology comes with opportunities, but also comes with some risks if it's not used properly. And so it's important to lay out the ethical and legal and regulatory issues. Let's take artificial intelligence. It has huge potential, but also comes with a lot of risks. And therefore, those need to be understood and managed and mitigated. Similarly, if you take genome editing, which became notorious 3 years ago, because one scientist decided to do an experiment involving humans, involving newborn babies, where there was no global consensus that this was an ethical approach. So we need to address these things proactively. So that was one reason for creating the science division. The second one was really to ensure that all of WHO's guidelines and normative work is of the highest technical standards, and also is using the latest technology, like digital technologies, in order to disseminate our information, because we cannot still be living in the era when we made fat books, 200-page books we printed, and then those books were distributed around the world. Today we're in a different world. People want information on their mobile phones, on their laptops and devices, and healthcare workers also increasingly should have the information on their devices. So it's to leverage that and to make sure that we have like a standard process across WHO for sort of a quality assurance of all of the work. and also to drive research, because research is one of the six objectives laid out in the WHO constitution, but there was never one central body within WHO who said, okay, this is how research should be done, or these are the policies, or these are the norms for research. So we created that. So those are really the functions of the science division. And during the pandemic, of course, all of these were tested. We were created 9 months before the pandemic. And as we got into the pandemic, we started working very closely with our emergency colleagues who do the response. And we were doing things like scanning the data, because as you know, there were a huge number of publications started appearing. So we were a big team just to scan that, to do a rapid review, to look at what is high quality data versus not so good quality. So because all data is not of equally high quality, you have to be able to distinguish managing misinformation and disinformation on social media. So we can talk more about that later, because I think young people will relate to that. And then doing the guidelines, we moved into something called living guidelines, where we said we need to update frequently as more and more as new data become available. We need to inform the world. These are the recent updates on how do you treat or how do you prevent COVID. So keeping up with all of that was our job. Our job is mainly in the background, supporting the emergency colleagues, but also we played, I think, a major role in coordinating global research. We developed a research roadmap for COVID way back in February of 2020, when COVID still hadn't hit Europe. And we had 400 scientists in Geneva for 3 days, developing a research roadmap for this new virus, which still holds true today. And we convened a lot of expert groups, hundreds of expert groups that meet every week to discuss the latest and to provide updates to the WHO. So the WHO works through networks of doctors, scientists, researchers around the world. It's not the secretariat that develops the policy, it's all of these people. And so that's one of the wonderful things of working in WHO, is that you are at the center of this global network, and people are willing to give a lot of time, to give of their experience, their knowledge, and this kind of sharing that I've seen in this pandemic, I've never seen before, of knowledge. Nobody is being selfish. Everybody wants to provide an update. As soon as you have the experiments, they're not worried about publications, they're not worried about credit. They want the world to know the latest. And so it's been very exciting actually to be in the center of that. And also a huge responsibility, because we need to synthesize all of that and convert it into guidelines for the world. And for many, many countries that don't have capacity to do their own evidence generation and policy making. The high-income countries mostly do it on their own, but for a large part of the world, they depend a lot on what WHO says. So it's a huge responsibility as well.
Absolutely. I know that it's a little bit sometimes sensitive, to talk more specifically about specific countries, but we have seen, and the students have seen, that during the pandemic, some presidents, some political responsibles have been sometimes far from the scientific, let's say, evidence-based. And at the same time, we know that at WHO, of course, all the countries are represented, and WHO is working for every country and for the whole world. So because students here will be in a leadership position after, you as a medical doctor, as a scientist, what would be, let's say, your lessons learned you have seen during the COVID, and the messages you would like to give to those future leaders you have in the room?
Yes, I think that's been one of the negatives for me of the pandemic. The fact that many leaders around the world did not follow the science, did not follow their own scientists or public health experts, and were, in fact, spreading misinformation. So this was very disturbing for us. And of course, WHO was also being attacked from time to time. We have to be neutral to all our 194 member states. Each member state is of the same value for us. But looking ahead, I think what was clear is that the trust in institutions is very important. And we saw that in countries that had trust in their government, that their public had the trust in government, in their leaders, had trust in public institutions, those countries did actually well in the response. In general, people trust doctors, they trust their own doctors. So I think trust in the medical establishment is all right, but it's trust in the public health institutions and trust in government bodies. Even when you look at vaccination campaigns, in many countries, people have not been willing. It's not a question of supplies. These countries have had adequate supplies. They've thrown away vaccines. They've had vaccines expiring, but people didn't want to take the vaccines because they suspect that it's not good for them, or that it's a conspiracy. That and of course there have been many conspiracy theories that have gone around as well. But essentially, it was clear that in the beginning of the pandemic that Southeast Asia did very well. And perhaps one reason was because they were exposed to SARS-1 in 2003. They had learned the lessons. But I think more than that, the public there generally trusts their leaders and their government and follows instructions that are given to them. Even something like masks, which became so political in some countries. In many countries of Southeast Asia, there is no debate about masks. It's a public health intervention. So I think for future politicians, it's really important to firstly build that culture of trust. And the way to do that is by being open and transparent with data and to share with the public why you're doing certain things. And secondly is to make sure you have the right advisors, that you have scientists, public health experts, and you also need social scientists. It's not only the hard sciences that you need, but you need good social and behavioral scientists. You need ethicists for policy making. Very often you take a policy decision which has a huge impact on some group of individuals that you had not expected. And so I think if you have ethicists there, to have representatives from different walks of life, then you're more likely to get a balanced kind of advice.
No, absolutely. And I think we have discussed that a lot with our students about, politicians, scientists, and civil society. We need to bring back confidence and trust between those three, let's say, pillars of our society, for sure. Maybe the last question, and then I will give the floor to the students. Most of my students here at Sciences Po are very aware about what we call decolonizing global health. And I would be very interested to have your point of view here, because, for instance, I'm from Chile, South American, you are from India, and we see here at Geneva and WHO, me at UNITAID, other places, that we have people coming from all around the world, but at the same time, people think that there is still a sort of very, European, American leadership on the way global health is moving. So because at Sciences Po, we have students from all around the world, what would be your recommendation coming from India and coming from other countries to open, let's say, the discussion and go to a true decolonizing global health?
I think that's a fantastic question also, and there is no doubt that more diversity can only be more helpful and better for organizations. And again, the DG of WHO, when he took office, Dr. Tedros, he made a commitment to both gender and geographic diversity, but particularly gender diversity. And in his senior leadership team, there's 60% are women. And I think the UN Secretary General has done the same. But this has to come, of course, all the way down at all levels. And particularly many organizations, as you go higher, the number of women in leadership positions is less and less. I have been personally many times in situations, both in India and outside, where I'm the only woman in the room. And very often you feel that you are not treated as an equal partner. As you get more senior and more experience, you learn how to deal with it. Similarly, I think for global health, which has been far too long the practice of Western universities and experts advising countries that are developing on how things should be done. But really, you can see now in the pandemic that a lot of the lessons have been learned actually from low and low middle income countries on how to have an effective and efficient, cost affordable response to the pandemic. And I think many of these countries have dealt with TB and malaria and HIV. They are used to a lot of community-based work. You know, they've invested in community health workers. Maybe they don't have the most sophisticated hospitals, but certainly invested in primary health care. That I think is advantageous for them, and particularly countries which are focused on the community engagement and empowerment aspects of healthcare delivery. They were the best in terms of how they were able to respond. So in the future, I hope that the people from all over the world, from high and other low-income countries, will realize that this power imbalance is not good for anyone. And I think funders also play a big role here, because very often you see these large funding announcements or opportunities, and then you find 95% of the funds goes to universities in the high-income countries, even though the research is being carried out somewhere in Africa or somewhere in Asia. So everyone has a role to play. I think there's a much more vigorous debate I see now on decolonizing global health, which is very good. And I think young people are much more sensitive to these issues. And I think future leaders and researchers should ensure that there is an equitable relationship and equitable, you know, when I talk to researchers from the South, we're talking about genomic sequencing data here. They were very reluctant initially to share their data publicly because of the historical experience where they put their data in a public database, and before they know it, it's all being published by someone else, because once you make it publicly available, anyone can use it. So it's not illegal, but they didn't get any recognition or credit for the work that they've done. So if we want more open data sharing, if we want in the future, look what happened in South Africa. They recognize Omicron variant so quickly because, you know, they've excellent genomic sequencing and excellent scientists. They made the world aware of Omicron within a matter of less than 2 weeks since it had first appeared. The response of the world was to ban travel from South Africa, to shut down flights. And if that's going to be the response, then next time countries are not going to be so willing, you know, to share. So I think this is the global debate that we need to have. And also at the WHO, as we talk about a pandemic treaty, what are the rules of the game? We need to be fair to everyone. And this hoarding of supplies, the hoarding that we saw in the beginning with PPE and oxygen, and now we see with vaccines, that's not a way to deal with the pandemic. And we have many such public health issues which concern the whole world. Of course, including climate change is the biggest issue that the next generation, our generation and the next, will have to confront. And so we need a different way of working together.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that the students will have probably questions around this planetary health, One Health, and environment. So thank you very much for this first part. And we're going to open now the floor to students. You have two options. We can take question in BootMe, amphitheatre, or by the chat. I don't know, Mark Malone, who is the director of PSIA, is in BootMe. So let me know if there are students who want to ask question to Dr. Soumya. Yeah, I see you, Mark, but I don't see if there are students. And if there are, please, you are muted at BootMe, so I can't hear you. Huh? Now it seems it's okay. The sound is not very, very good, Mark. We can't hear you, in fact.
Hopefully it'll be better when they come to the mic. Is that better?
Yeah, absolutely. Now we can hear you.
Okay, I'm just asking them to line up to ask questions. I see one student already there, and to say their name, what country they come from, and what they're studying before. Succinct questions.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, Mark.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you very much to be with us today. My name is Amanda. I come from, I come from China. I'm in international governance and diplomacy program. And my question is because personally, I'm very interested in international cooperation in general as a topic, as a theme. And when we talk about topics like public health, it's a common issue that all countries, all entities need to work together on, but there are different polities. And for example, especially in the light of COVID, we observe different political systems have very different methods in how to respond to a pandemic or to a public health crisis. And on an international level, what are international organizations' method where how do we bring everyone together despite the differences in political system, but to work on one thing together? So as you said, you're talking about sharing scientific data and all this and that, but there are so many countries that are not very cooperative in sharing all that. And on international level, what can we do? So from your perspective, from your experience, can you tell us a bit more? Thank you.
Very good question, how to deal at WHO with different health systems and make everyone collaborate. Dr. Soumya.
Yeah, do you still hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, because I tried to change the mic. I don't know if this is any better.
Yeah, I think it's much better.
Okay. So this is an excellent question, and it obviously doesn't have a simple answer because this is what geopolitics is all about. But, you know, from my perspective, cooperating on health should be an easier opportunity for countries than, you know, they may have lots of differences, geopolitical differences. We know that, you know, there's a lot of tension going on in the world just now and a lot of divisive sort of politics. But when it comes to health, and when it comes to some situations or issues which are going to impact all countries, then, or majority of countries, then, you know, we should start with finding a way to work together on those issues. And I think climate change, again, is one. The other is, of course, pandemics. But apart from an infectious disease pandemic, I would say there are other major public health problems globally that would benefit from this type of cooperation. Now, what are the areas where we would need their cooperation and some rules to be established? The first, as I mentioned, is I think data sharing, because if you don't know what's going on in different countries, then it's very difficult to have a response. So this is true for national leaders. So let's say we stop sharing genomic sequence data, we would have no clue about the variants. In fact, this is the first pandemic, I think, where we've had real time, because of the explosion in genetic sequencing, we've been able to track each variant and really try and get on top of it. It's been so useful. So I think that's the first area of data sharing. But I mentioned some of the issues around that. So it has to be fair. If you share data, you should also get the benefits, which is what researchers in the South are asking. What's the benefit for us to share the data? Because we don't see the fruits of that. Vaccines are developed based on these new sequences, but those vaccines are all bought by high-income countries. They're not available to, say, an African country which provided that initial data. So I think we have to have some rules there, and everybody has to play by the game. The second area would be, I think, in research and development of these products, because again, science has advanced a lot because governments have invested over many decades in science. It hasn't happened only because of the private sector. The private sector played an important role, no doubt, and will continue to play. But government investments, taxpayer money has also played a very major role in these discoveries. So the benefits should not be, they should not only be profits going to the private sector. There has to be some, again, a fair and equitable approach
to sharing these benefits. So here again, there's a lot of tension between the private sector, which says if you want innovation, then you have to let us protect our intellectual property. And we are saying, well, you know, if it's a question of lives versus profits, you have to put lives first. And therefore, it doesn't make sense to not share the technology around these vaccines, for example, because we could have a lot more countries making vaccines and it could become more affordable. But again, this needs to be set down and everyone needs to agree to this. And then we need an agreement also on enforcing certain public health measures. And we've seen again in travel rules and travel restrictions, the WHO does have a committee that makes recommendations, but countries are not following that necessarily. They're doing their own rules. This has impacted global travel and trade in a big way. And it's had a huge economic impact as well. So if we want to reduce the economic impact, especially on the poor, and at the same time, you have public health, evidence-based guidelines on travel, on testing, on public health measures. And if everybody follows that, then I think it'll be better. So, and I think it's the same for climate change, right? Because we know exactly what has to be done. Everyone needs to agree that they'll do their part. But traditionally, you've had the low-income countries contributing much less to climate change. So again, there's an equity issue there. Should some countries be doing more because, you know, they have contributed more and they can also afford more. And the technology is also coming from those countries. So again, technology transfer is something that we have set up now, a technology transfer hub for mRNA. We'll do it for other technologies in the hope that we can build a larger network of both academic labs and companies that can use mRNA to make products for other diseases, for example. So it's an excellent question. I'm sure I haven't answered it. There's no magic solution to this. But unless leaders accept the fact that they have to work together, and I think many leaders are doing that. In fact, there are lots of supporters for this pandemic treaty. Over 100 countries have signed up. And now we've established an intergovernmental negotiating body that will work over the next year or two to actually develop this kind of a framework convention. You know, the only health convention we have that's legally binding is a tobacco convention that took 5 years to negotiate. I hope the next one won't take 5 years, but let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and absolutely key also to see how we have moved from a situation with governments were in the center, you know, of the global health governance, with now having private actors also taking part of that. So it's not only about putting together different states, but it's also about creating the space with those private actors. Mark, is there any other question?
Yes,
input me, because I don't see it. The screen is
I'll get
black.
Can we put the screen back on and boot to me, please? And we've got,
now it's perfect. Now we see you.
And we've got at least two. I even think there's a third. There's 3 questions, so maybe you can take all 3 of them and then do a selected.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Please.
Let's do it like this.
Hello, I'm Hannah, and I am from the US, and I'm in my first year of environmental policy here at SIA. And my question is kind of regarding, you brought up both climate change and this current health crisis we're in, and how can we better create global solutions and policies to address the interlinkages between health and environmental concerns, because they are very interlinked, especially even as there's more deforestation and everything, that there is more invasive species that could potentially cause issues of more pandemics. How can we address these issues better?
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to take the other 2 questions, so you can respond to all of them. Please.
Hi.
Yes, a little bit louder.
Hey, so, okay, that's
perfect.
So my name is Augustine. I come from Mexico, and I'm doing the program on human rights and humanitarian action. My question is related to the little discussion you had regarding trust, especially from politicians trusting doctors and science. I think it's interesting that we trust doctors to cure us because we don't understand the diseases. We trust the architect to build a house because we don't know how to do it. Yet politics is the only area where non-experts participate, which I think is interesting. And I'm going to this because studying human rights, and I find it interesting the whole limits on freedom of expression. And I understand that a big problem in the current handling of the pandemic is the debate between experts, right? So I guess my question is, from your perspective, what's the appropriate limit that the marketplace of ideas needs to have when it comes to the protection of lives and when it comes to, scientists agreeing for the most part, yet also having a small minority that disagrees with a lot of the measures, right? So what are the limits on the marketplace of ideas?
Important question, and I think it's Lucia, right?
Yes, my name is Lucia. I'm doing the Master in Advanced Global Studies. I'm from Argentina. You were mentioning before, we were mentioning about One Health, and there was an article in The Lancet last September that called The Coming of Age of One Health with the pandemic. And I was wondering, what were your thoughts on that, and if it's something that you see reflected in changes in how policies are thought, or what the parameters that we're taking into consideration. And one small question in regard to this as well is, at the WHO, do you feel there is enough participatory mechanisms for everyone to be involved in the decisions that are being made? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. Dr. Soumya? Not easy questions, I know.
Great questions. So congratulations on those. I think that itself is a process of bringing about change, is thinking about these issues, putting them out there and discussing them. So I think the points around climate change and health and environment being interconnected, and this whole issue of One Health that I think is now getting more attention, is very important, because we know that zoonotic infections are the likeliest sources of new pandemics. If you look at previous epidemics and pandemics like avian flu, like Ebola, like Zika, they've all come, and HIV, all have their origins in animals. SARS-1, MERS, either with or without an intermediate host. So clearly, the interactions that the human species is having with animals, wild and domesticated wild animals, and then the opportunities in places like the wet markets, where there are living animals of all types and species intermingling with humans, gives opportunities for the viruses to, and we know that there are many viruses that infect each of these species, but this is where the cross-species jump can happen, and recombinations, and ultimately there's a virus that becomes pathogenic in humans and then starts spreading from human to human. That is the most dangerous thing, and that's what's been happening. So in the future also, I think pandemics, there will be more pandemics. This is not the last pandemic. We cannot predict when, but if you look at the last 70 years, I think pandemics are coming more regularly than they were in the past. It's because of urbanization, for deforestation, and illegal trade in wildlife, and all these other things that are happening. So this is why I think the One Health concept is important, because you have to look at not just diseases that affect humans, but animals and the environment holistically. And there needs to be surveillance mechanisms. They need to be talking to each other, and these siloed approaches, that we need to find the bridges to build between them. There are also things like the use of antibiotics that we use for humans are widely used in animals, but also used in agriculture. These antibiotics then get disseminated into the environment and have been causing a major cause of antimicrobial resistance. And as you know, that's also one of the big threats for the future, is bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics and having untreatable infections. So this whole area is key, and we need to build this cross-interdisciplinary science here. And I think that's the future, moving away from silos to learning to work together with different disciplines, working with agriculture, with veterinary, but also with modelers, with bioinformaticians, with people who know how to do sequencing, with virologists, to understand more about these jumps that are happening in nature. And we've set up a group also to look at the origins of pandemics, not just this one, but others, and how do we approach it scientifically? What sort of studies are going to be needed? On the question of scientists disagreeing with each other, I think that's it's part of science is to have disagreements and to have debates, but these debates should be based on on the available information, and scientists must always be ready to accept that what they know today can change tomorrow because of new evidence coming along. So we can never be dogmatic. And the one thing I've learned in this job is to be humble, and particularly with this virus. Every time somebody makes a prediction, you are proven wrong by this virus. And so you have to be humble, but at the same time, of course, you have to be data driven. But what is unnecessary and unpleasant today, I think, is the debate turning very ugly, very personal at times, and sort of attacking you on your, just because you have a different view. And this has happened even with things like hydroxychloroquine, which was clearly, there was a lot of evidence to show it didn't work for COVID, and a drug like ivermectin. And yet, just because as a chief scientist, I said that these drugs don't work, here's the evidence, WHO has recommended not to use these drugs, except for, I was attacked personally in all sorts of ways, slanderous ways, for having said that. And there's a whole polarization that happens around. So that's not the way that scientific discourse and debate should take place. We should be open to being challenged, but in a more appropriate way, not using social media really to attack you. And then there was another interesting question about WHO and whether we have the mechanisms. Yes, we are conscious that we don't have all the voices that we probably need to have, because I think we are driven by the member states, and the people who represent on the WHO governing bodies are the ministries of health. Today, because of the pandemic, this is no longer restricted to ministries of health. So we have heads of state, we have finance ministers, development ministers, all taking an interest in health, and therefore in WHO and its governance and its future role and so on. The financing of WHO as well is a matter being discussed. But we also now have set up civil society groups. So the DG meets regularly with civil society from around the world. We talk now with the media and journalists much more than we used to, again, thanks to the pandemic. So I saw in the chat, there was a question about how was it being a chief scientist before and after March 2020. And I think many of these things changed. There was a need for us to be much more faster, be more efficient, and yet continue to be driven by very rigorous science, or to balance, because earlier it wasn't urgent, and we could take a year to develop a guideline. Today we cannot. The guideline needs to be developed in weeks, if not days. So, and then being much more having to deal with media, but also with the general public. So our communication, I think, has increased, I would say, 100-fold in the last 2 to 3 years. And we have regular, using all social media platforms, as well as traditional platforms, we are communicating much more. And I think the awareness of people on health, maybe that's the one good thing, is that not just governments, but ordinary individuals now understand how health is so important, and why governments need to invest and individuals need to invest in their health.
Absolutely. And students, you can, of course, follow Dr. Soumya on Twitter. She's very active and posting a lot of important. So this is also something that probably 4 or 5 years ago we will never be working like this, absolutely. Well, I see there are other questions, very important one about the role, for instance, of private actors or foundation like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We unfortunately don't have more time. I don't know if on just this specific one, Dr. Soumya, because there is a lot of question about how WHO is interacting with foundation philanthropy. We have the FENS agreement, but more globally, if you can say just very quickly, what about this interaction with other actors outside from states?
Yeah, so clearly, I think philanthropic organizations are playing a major role in global health. I think this is good. We need to see more of this happening because you need more funding going into global health, going into research, as well as into building capacity for innovation, for product development, and so on. And of course, foundations are much more flexible. They have their own priorities and so on. Now, in terms of playing an outsized role, yes, I mean, there's a lot that's been written about. And in fact, again, one of the things that WHO is concerned about is the fact that 40 years ago, the contributions from government to WHO's budget was 80% of the budget came from assessed contributions and contributions from governments. Those are flexible funds, and they go to the priorities that have been set by the same member states through our executive board and World Health Assembly. Today, the situation is reversed. It's 20% coming from countries, and 80% of our budget is raised through what we call voluntary funds, which can come either from governments or many times they're coming from foundations and philanthropy and other organizations. And the issue here is when you have that kind of an imbalance, then the priorities that are being worked on are not necessarily the ones that were set by the member states, but really are driven by the funding agencies. And so this is not an ideal situation at all. And so we are saying to our member states, we need to get the balance right, because then you cannot then complain and say that WHO is being influenced by some bodies just because of, we have to raise funds from somewhere for the work. So while the Secretariat, we try our best to make sure that we have the priorities right, that we work on our priorities, we don't get sort of tempted just because there's some funding available to go off and do something else. Of course, there's a lot of work to be done. So you do what you can. And if there's funding available, it's much easier then to finish that piece of work. So I think this is again a discussion around how WHO should be financed and funded. And if countries want a strong WHO, then they have to also finance it so that it's not, so that the imbalance can be corrected and brought back. But I think foundations play an important role because clearly they can fund flexibly many things that governments cannot, and they can take risk with money, which government agencies cannot.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're going absolutely out of time. So I would like, first of all, to thank you again, Dr. Soumya, to be with us. It was very inspiring, I think, for the students. I think we understood we need science. We need trust between scientists and politicians and civil society, that's for sure. And we need also a strong WHO, as you mentioned at the end. So for the future leaders we have here in the room, if we want WHO be playing its role, we need to support it and to improve the way we work with other actors. So thank you very, very much. I hope that the students that are interested by global health, you will have the possibility to follow the global health concentration we have in PSIA, and when we try to address most of those questions, and happy to see you very soon in the classroom. Mark?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of everyone here. We're about 80 or 90 in the Boutmy Amphitheater. I think you're in this screen. No, you're in this screen behind us now. So thank you from here, and wonderful, great exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
It's a pleasure.
Goodbye.
Thanks, bye-bye.